Well, welcome everybody. This is Don Graves, president of the Gila Native Plant Society. I'd first of all like to give congratulations to our newly elected at-large board members, Mary Barrett, Margie Gibson, Rick Lass, Beth Like, and Susan Thompson. So very happy that they took the initiative to serve for a 2-year term at least. And then I would really like to say thank you to those outgoing board members who have served for so long, some of them, Keller, Supercrop, Emily Pollum, Les Brandt, and Joan Limmer. So give your little round of applause for our newly elected board and those leaving our board. Well, the Gila Native Plant Society has been very, very fortunate in the past to have a fine cadre of botanists. And we lost a couple in the last year or so, but we still have a good contingent of botanists. And one of those is surgeon turned botanist, Russ Kleinman. And I'm going to let Russ introduce our tonight's speaker, Daniela Roth. Okay, Russ, take it away.
Thank you, Don. It's my great pleasure tonight to introduce Daniela Roth. Daniela has worked with the New Mexico Endangered Plant Program since 2012. And before that, she did work for the Navajo Natural Heritage Program and then for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Utah. I believe I first met Daniela around 2014 when she was investigating populations of a penstemon in the Gila. Besides being intelligent, resourceful, and fun to be around, Daniela can be tough as nails. Daniela and I hiked together up North Percha Creek to an area that is now nearly inaccessible since the fires and flooding. After that, we attempted to find a population of these penstemons in another canyon between Hillsboro and the fork in the road called Nut. We took Highway 27 south from Hillsboro, then drove on a dirt road west back up into the Black Range. Unfortunately, 11 miles off the pavement, we were on a primitive road on a gravelly bench about 10 feet over a creek. I believe it had rained hard a day or two earlier when the earth beneath us suddenly gave way and dropped our truck partly off the side of the embankment towards the creek. After trying unsuccessfully to free the truck, Daniela anchored the truck with ropes to a nearby tree to prevent it from falling completely down into the creek below, and we took off on foot back towards Highway 27, 11 miles back from the truck. You learn a lot about someone when you walk 11 miles out of the forest with them. I'm very happy to hear from Daniela about the current status of Allium gooddingii tonight, and I'm even happier that we don't have to hike 11 miles to do so. Take it away, Daniela.
Well, unfortunately, after 1997, nothing was ever done again for the species. And in 2007, the conservation agreement ran out without anybody noticing. So the only pre-fire data that we have is from basically pre-1997 when the species was heading towards listing. A whole bunch of work was done on it. And that's how we know of all the populations that we know today. But we do not have any information on abundance of the species pre-fire. Back then, the primary threats were grazing and logging. And it's still listed, state listed endangered, and it's a Forest Service sensitive species in Arizona and in New Mexico. And in response to the status reports from myself in New Mexico and various people in Arizona, NatureServe now gives it an imperiled rank despite its distribution. And the primary threats are now considered wildfires and climate change. And this is combined with the inadequacy of regulatory mechanisms. In the Gila National Forest, there are 30 known sites. So this is what the habitat of Giddings onion looks like in the Gila National Forest, although I have to say that I do not have a photo of intact habitat in the Gila National Forest, but this one looks like it's intact. If I would have taken that picture in the other direction, it would have been completely burned. This is Iron Creek, up in the Mogollon. And so in the Gila, it's mostly found in cool, damp, upper elevation mixed conifer forests, pretty much about above 8,000 feet. It really likes north-facing slopes, and it is often found along stream sides and drainage bottoms, and also in rock outcrops next to perennial streams. And this is the distribution of Gooding's onion. And we consider there to be 5 meta populations, and that's the one here in the Gila and the adjacent Apache sitgreaves. And then there's one in the Chusca Mountains on the Navajo Nation, one in the Lincoln National Forest, and one in the Coronado National Forest. So there are multiple locations up in the Chuscas and in the Lincoln, as well as in the Coronado, but clearly the center of the population is right here in the Apache sitgreaves and the Gila National Forest. This is a pretty wide distribution, really, for rare plant by New Mexico standards, and was one of the reasons why they decided not to list it along with the conservation measures laid out in the conservation agreement. And so this is a map of the fires that have occurred since 2006. So I started this job with the state of New Mexico in 2012 when the Whitewater Baldy fire was burning. And then also the Little Bear fire over in the Lincoln National Forest. And because I actually have a master's degree in fire ecology, I was kind of intrigued about what actually happens with rare plants after the fire. And so I was doing some research and some GIS exercise. So I found all the data on our rare and endangered plants in New Mexico, and I overlaid it with a layer of the fires. And this is what came out with. And I found that over 95% of the known populations of Gooding onions have burned really in 8 different fires since 2006. And it was 3 different fires. It was only 3 different fires in 2013, but it was big fires. It was the Wallow fire over here in Arizona that burned almost all of the Arizona populations. The Whitewater Baldy fire that burned most of the Gila populations, and here the 2012 Little Bear fire in the White Mountains in the Lincoln National Forest. So I was looking for reports, and the Bear reports, which is the Burned Area Emergency Response Report that the Forest Service puts out, which details impacts to sensitive resources and human life and infrastructure. And they always had a generic sentence about rare plants. You know, yes, rare plants are there, but we expect them to be fine because they have evolved with fire. But I wanted to see if that is true. So I got a grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service to study 8 different species in the Gila National Forest that were either rare or endemic within the Whitewater Baldy perimeter, and also over in the Lincoln. So in 2013, 28 of the 30 known locations were burned since 2006. And 21 of the 30 were within the Whitewater Baldy fire perimeter. And 18 were targeted in my 2013 to 2015 surveys. And I also looked at an additional 5 sites in the Bear Fire perimeter, which is in the Indian Creek drainage, just for reference to get an idea of what the status of the plant might be some years down the road, because a high severity fire will completely alter the habitat, and I was not so sure that it would persist in the altered habitat. I also looked at fire severity impact. So fires burn patchy, you know. The whitewater baldy was largely a high severity fire, where all of the trees are dead, all of the overstory trees are dead. But even within the whitewater baldy, there are patches of low severity burns, which means that there was little impact to the understory, and just about all or most overstory trees are alive. And mostly after a few years, you could no longer tell that there was a fire a few years ago. Then there's moderate fire severity, where we have both live and dead trees. And sometimes there depends on the dead to live tree ratios on how the rare plants respond. So if there's too many dead trees, then you get a lot of competition from deciduous woody species, especially oak and locust after the fire, but also you get a lot of blowdown that covers populations, and flood can impact populations significantly. And floods actually can impact Gooding's onion populations anywhere, even in places that have not burned, if they're located below a burn, if the drainage rips out or debris flow happens. So these are some of the results, and I'm comparing this with a study that was done by Davina Grossley in 2012. So she was working for the Forest Service in 2012, and she was doing a survey of a set of rare plants that she was trying to relocate to see if they're still there, and then the fire happened. So she was looking for these 20 Allium gooddingii sites, regardless on whether they were within the whitewater baldy fire scar or not. And so these are her 20 sites here. And so the top ones are the ones that were burned in 2012. So when she was out there, they had burned that year or that spring. And then she has these sites here that were burned in 2006. And then she also went to 5 sites that had not seen any fire. So she looked at freshly burned, 6 years since the last burn, and not burned. And then, so the orange ones are the ones I also looked at between 2013 and 2015. And the yellow ones are the ones I also looked at in 2020. So what's important here is the decline. So again, we didn't have any numbers of plants pre-fire. We had locations, and that's it. So that's why I don't have any pre-fire information. But by now, I feel pretty confident that plants in general, at least in the Gila, actually survived the fires pretty well. And you can see that in several sites, she had thousands of plants. She had where there was plants, there was still a significant number of plants in 2012, right after the fire. And then I came back within a year, 2 or 3, and so at this point I had GPS points. So those are pretty accurate. So I feel pretty sure about the numbers, and you can already see that the numbers are going down. So plants, what the takeaway here is that plants survive the fire, but then they start on a decline. And also, again here, she found no plants in 5 sites. I did not find any plants in those 5 sites either. The only place where she did find plants was a little unburned island, or maybe a moderately burned island, where she found 75 plants. But I actually didn't go there to check and see if they were still there. Yeah, that's all I want to say about this slide. So for my study between 2013 and 2015, I found plants in 12 locations. So out of those 18, I attempted 14 within the whitewater baldy scar, and I found plants in 12 locations, and 2 locations there was no more plants found. And just like Davina in 2012, I found no plants in the 5 locations within the Bear Fire scar. We find that persistence is largely determined by fire severity. And small sites may remain in severely burned forest in unburned or lightly burned patches. The immediate impacts of fire include the direct fire impacts through soil scorching, post-fire flood erosion, stream bank incision and debris deposits, and long-term impacts include habitat conversion, resource competition, and blowdown. So this is a picture of what happened to the habitat in the Indian Creek drainage. This is what it looked like 7 years after the Bear Fire. So the drainages are blown out. It's completely open and exposed. There is really no shade. All the trees are dead. Pasture, really. So this used to be a population, but there is no more habitat. So I have some pictures of what the situation looked like between 2013 and 2014. Basically, we had like huge debris flows and debris deposit, huge blowout of drainages, which is really their favorite habitat. And that ultimately lowers the water table. Encountered massive floods in 2013. There's a great picture of a debris flow in a lesser burned area, but it comes from above. And you can see it's a tiny trickle of a stream, but it's buried, buried at least under 5 feet of mud. And this is actually a population of Allium gooddingii that's hanging on here next to this tree, and everything else is just completely blown out. This drainage is blown out and completely scoured. The floods have completely scoured the surface. And again, debris flows were just halted here by those trees. And this population was still there in 2013, but it was gone in 2020. Another debris flow picture. This is a debris deposit in Hale Canyon, and this is at least 5 feet of rubble in an unburned forest. All of this rubble came from at least a mile upstream where we had severe fire impacts. So even if the plants occurred right here, not inside of the fire, they were completely buried by these debris flows. So that's a major impact on Allium gooddingii and Allium gooddingii habitat. So it was unpleasant in 2013 to 2015. It was catastrophic and difficult to access, and I didn't expect anything better in 2020 when I went back. Actually, I've been going back since 2017 because so there was 5 species in the Gila. There was 8 species originally, and 3 of them did well through the fire without any further concerns, but there was 5 of them that I decided I was curious what the situation would look like after after the habitat has stabilized in its new condition. And that was not really a great idea in terms of effort. So what you have now is serious blowdown and still blowdown. So trees are still falling while I was out there. Extremely difficult to reach areas. Some of them basically impossible to reach. A lot of the areas are totally overgrown with locust and aspen or oak. And so that resource competition and the blowdown have also buried a number of populations since. This is Beat Spring up on the Crest Trail. In 2020, I visited 11 out of the 12 locations that had plants in them from 2013 to 2015, and also 55 waypoints where we had documented plants. But I also went to do 2 disjunct populations that were previously unburned, and I wanted to go to those. So that was there's one site in the Tularosa Mountains and one in Freeborn Canyon up in the San Franciscos. And I really had the need of seeing an unburned population in the Gila and wondered what it would look like. So I added those. So 1 location and 3 waypoints from our previous studies were not visited because of access difficulties. And so this is the basic results. So I want to first talk about this picture. So this is in Freeborn, which is to this day the last significant unburned population in the Gila National Forest, but it got impacted by post-fire floods. In 2018, there was a fire in, it's called the Owl Fire. There was a fire just right above this population, and it blew out this drainage. So there's still plants here. Let's see. I documented 966, and Davina Crossley reported 3,500. But I did not survey the entire area because it was very difficult to get through here in 2020. But I believe that this is probably still the best population there's out there. And I went also to the Tularosa Mountains to look at the one population that was documented from Long Canyon, and it had burned. And I didn't even know about that, nor did I think about it, but it also burned in 2018 in the Buzzard Fire, which was, I think, almost 100,000 acres. So those 2 that had previously not burned are now also burned or impacted by fire. So again, you have some of them that are yellow here are also the ones that were documented by Davina right after the fire. And you can see that most of them are really, how many I got there, 13. Only 4 out of the 13 locations that I visited were either increasing or they were stable. And the ones that were increasing were in unburned forest, and the ones that were stable were in light or moderately burned forest. So if we count what Davina originally documented in the unburned forest in 2012, there was about we documented about 9,000 plants. And that is now reduced. This time around, I only documented about 2,300. So it's not looking good. So to sum it up, as of 2021, we know that 4 out of 5 meta populations have been significantly impacted by wildfires since 2006. And that includes Arizona and New Mexico. I think the Bighorn fire was also, that was in Arizona, that burned the Coronado, Allium gooddingii sites. And I know somebody went out and looked after them this summer, but I don't remember what they found. But again, it's oftentimes it's the long-term persistence that is questionable. So the remaining unburned populations are really primarily located on tribal lands. In Arizona, adjacent to the Apache sitgreaves on Apache lands, and in New Mexico on the Navajo Nation. And we have this one large unburned population on the Gila National Forest. And that one should be closely monitored and is mostly intact. But that's the best one there is as we're speaking, has not burned yet. 14 of the 13 documented, only 4 of the 13 documented sites are increasing or stable. And the other extant sites are remnant patches in burned forest of 500 or fewer plants. So the smaller patches, I think the ones that have hundreds of them will probably do okay, but the ones that have, I say, 150 or fewer, or that have shown significant declines from our last study, those are probably going to go away. So this is again a map of the Gila populations. The green ones are the populations that were documented prior to the fire, so that's all 30 of them. And then the blue triangles and the yellow stars are what we currently know, especially the yellow stars. Those are from 2020. So we now know that Gooding's onion may survive the immediate impacts of even severe fires as long as the soil didn't torch. And I'm saying that because in the Lincoln National Forest, the Little Bear fire, most of the populations were lost to soil torching. So there were none left. But either way, post-fire flooding and habitat conversion have, in general, greater impact on the continued existence of onion patches than the fire itself. In areas of complete habitat conversion, plants are not expected to persist. Small unburned patches may contribute to the long-term future expansion if the forest returns, which could take 1,000 years. And for good measure, here's a photo of an intact Gooding's onion population in the Lincoln National Forest above 10,000 feet. This is a site that may not be seen again for 1,000 years. So I was in the Lincoln doing the same study on their populations, and I knew that there was a site map that had not burned in 2012. But because in 2012 I was focused on burned area, I had not visited this one. So so this in 2020 I went and visited those, and I find 100,000 plants underneath the mature canopy of spruce fir forest. So what you have here is a climax community of spruce fir Allium gooddingii. You can see that there is just about nothing else in the understory, and there's also no woody debris. So there's really, which is quite remarkable. A lot of other spruce fir forests are really loaded with dead wood. Unfortunately, that site burned in 2021, and that's what it looks like. So there's a fire that came down up the Three Rivers drainage, the Three Rivers fire, and it was a very fast fire, and it completely torched all the trees. So this is a severe fire. Killed all the trees, but it did not torch the soil. So when we came back after the fire this summer, all the plants were still there. However, this population is a rare population in that it is actually located on the south-facing slope. So we do not expect this population to persist over the long term, and the Forest Service finally set up some monitoring plots, and they're now looking at recently burned plots, what happens to the onion versus the 2012 burned plots. And then there's like maybe there might be 1 acre left of what we would consider now undisturbed forest. So it's looking extremely dire for the species. So here are my recommendations on what needs to be done if we want this species to continue. First of all, it needs active management. There has not been any management on the species since it got to be removed from consideration for listing in 1997. It needs a committed conservation plan with listing best management practices, particularly pertaining to grazing and logging, and in the Lincoln National Forest, ski Apache management. They also need to look at post-fire management practices and how restoration practices might impact the onion, which was a huge issue at ski Apache in the Lincoln National Forest, and also monitor population for threats and population trends. I have some hope that there might still be some intact populations in unburned habitats. There was a lot of survey effort in the late 80s and early 90s, and really nobody's been looking for the onions since. So there could still be some unburned populations out there. But we really need to protect the remaining sites and be conscious of them when fires happen, so that some firefighting activities might keep the forest from burning. We have started seed collections for population augmentation and ex situ conservation purposes on the Lincoln National Forest this summer, and I actually also collected a bunch of seeds in 2015 in the Gila, which was a good thing because those populations are actually no longer there in 2020. So I think this is a prime candidate for listing under the Endangered Species Act, and I'm hoping that the Fish and Wildlife Service will take it on. So my 2015 report, my 2020 reports can be found on our website here. If you Google Mexico State Forestry or State Forestry Division or New Mexico Endangered Plant Program, you can download it from our website. And other great resources for endangered plants in New Mexico is, of course, our rare plant website, which has descriptions and photos of all of some 200 if you want to learn more of what's going on in the Gila. And also the Heritage Program has some great information about our rare plants. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Daniela. That was wonderful. I appreciate that. I have a question for you, and I see that there are a few more in the chat box already for you too. My question for you, I wonder if I would almost assume that Allium gooddingii must be rhizomatous by those huge rhizomatous appearing populations. I wonder if the population problem was even greater, because if those are all clones, then there are really only 3 or 4 DNA varieties out there. So even though you may have thousands of plants, you may only have 5 different genomes out there. Or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's really, I consider the Lincoln population really just one population. They were all once connected, and they were fragmented by ski Apache. And, but they were all connected. And all connected through pollinators too. But in the Gila, it was many smaller patches, so 30 patches originally, and they were separate enough that you would have a larger genetic diversity in the Gila than you would have in the Lincoln for sure.
Cool. That lends a little bit more hope. I've got a number of questions here in the chat box. Let's see if we can start from the top here. You mentioned 5 species that did well post-fire. Can you tell us what those species are?
No, there's 8 species that I was studying in the Gila. There was only 3 that did well, and 5 did not so well, or 5 warranted further study based on habitat. So the 3 that did well was Hess's fleabane, Erigeron hessii, that grow, even though there's only 2 populations or 3 known, it grows on large rock outcrops, and those rock outcrops actually fared pretty well through the fire. So they were still there after the fire, and I have no reason to believe that anything has changed for them. And then there was a Gila thistle, Gila Cirstium hilense, and that actually responds rather well to disturbances, including fire, and you can see it in the Gila along the forest roads oftentimes, and in some of the burned areas it actually looked like some places it looked like it was a weed, and I think some people mistook it for invasive species, but the Gila thistle was doing well through disturbance. And the last one was Hyraceum pravipilum, something brother hawkweed, Gila hawkweed. There was only a few populations in the Gila, but it grows in the understory of ponderosa pine, and so the ponderosa pine areas burned lightly through the understory, and it's a fire-adapted system, so not much changed there, and the populations were doing just fine after the fire, and I had no reason to believe that things would change. The ones that were disconcerting or a question was this Allium gooddingii. It was the Mogollon death camas, Anticlea mogollonensis, heartleaf groundsel, Pachyra cardamine. It was the penstemon, the Metcalf's penstemon metcalfii, and the membranous pickwort, Scrophularia macrantha.
Russ, Emily has a question.
Go for it.
Hi, I have 2 questions. The first is just what months could we expect to see this species flowering if we're out and about and want to keep an eye out for it? And secondly, do you know anything about the presence of this species on the Mescalero Apache land that is around the Lincoln? Thank you.
July, maybe into early August, or it becomes more difficult to see when it goes to seed. I do know that one reference population that remains in the Lincoln National Forest is immediately adjacent to Apache land, Mescalero land, and we could actually see that the population was extending up into Mescalero, but we didn't go there. So the population is actually bigger, but when you look at aerial photography, it ends at a road, and the area is also heavily impacted by the ski resort activities. But I think there's still some potential on Mescalero up at Sierra Blanca, that there might be some better populations.
Super. We have another question. Yasmin says, great presentation. What would be involved with restoring Gooding's onion? Would you have to grow them out and transplant? Are there any restoration efforts occurring? You partially explained that, but go ahead and try again.
Yeah, unfortunately, this species thrives in climax forest communities, so it takes 1,000 years to grow forest like that, and or at least hundreds of years. So with respect to restoring the habitat where they once were, I think that would be a monumental undertaking, but it might be possible to bring them into suitable habitat that just doesn't have any onions, but is otherwise suitable. I think that would be a much better idea than restoring the habitat.
Melanie Geisler asks, says, thanks, Daniela. Did you measure the impact of fire on seed set? Did you see any new individuals establishing following the fires?
No, that would really require a very close observation and a lot of time, and we don't have pre-fire data. You know, so we did keep track of flowering or fruiting, and it's typically only about 10% of the population that is flowering or fruiting. But I can't really say how that compares to an unburned area because I don't have any unburned areas.
I'm also suspecting that it might be difficult if it's rhizomatous to know what a new individual actually is.
Yes. Yes.
Chris Overlook asks, I believe the Gila National Forest will release an updated forest management plan next year. There was some talk of a botanical preserve or area. Have you been able to provide any input to the Gila National Forest?
Yeah, that botanical preserve area is actually originally based on the important plant areas map that I put out, and that's part of the New Mexico Rare Plant Conservation Strategy, where the important plant areas map is based on known occurrences of all 235 rare and endemic plant species in New Mexico, but it's not very habitat based. Basically, we just drew polygons around the known sites or occurrences with an approximation of habitat, and we also did not consider ownership. So somebody, one of you people, narrowed it down, or maybe with the help of the Forest Service, narrowed it down to some of those botanical focus areas, or whatever they called them. And I do remember I commented on that because it didn't include any management of those special botanical areas. It just included some educational signs. So those should be special management areas.
Thank you.
So the top up there of the Mogollon Mountains, that's one of them. And that's where you have some in the highest elevations is where you have the highest species diversity of rare plants.
Dennis Switzer asks if any populations have been affected by the reseeding after the fires. And here, I think what he's asking about are those frequently non-native grasses that are dropped from the air onto the burned areas.
Okay, so I also looked into that. Excuse me. Originally, I also took note of invasive species in any of those sites, and including those grasses. And I do have to say that the grasses don't seem to persist. There are some native species that come in full force that can easily be considered weedy. That's why I was saying I wanted to come back when the situation has stabilized, because first after the fire, there's kind of a real flush of herbaceous plants, and then but then some of the deciduous woody species start coming in. So it's kind of it's a real mess, even in the absence of invasive species that are not native. But I think in the Gila, for the most part, the invasive species, they were there, but they were not a problem.
Cool. So are the aspens that pop up the next year, are they helping or hurting? You know, in some of these areas, you almost can't even walk through them because the aspen shoots are so thick.
Well, the aspens are one of those that actually worried me exactly because of that, because they came up immediately after the fire in full force, and you know, there's places where it's incredibly difficult to get through now. And so yes, that's part of the resource competition that they outcompete Gooding's onion and are probably partially responsible for the decline over those years.
Gerald has asked, would the natural distribution of these seeds be by bird droppings, especially when talking about areas far from the central area in Arizona and New Mexico?
Possibly. I don't know that much about birds. I mean, they're largely in the understory. They're not very attractive or visible, or the fruits are not. And they, you know, they just have these capsules that open up. It's almost more likely, seems to me, they do get eaten by elk and by deer. It's probably more distributed by big game than by birds, I would think.
Yeah, unfortunately, possibly also by me now and then when I'm out there, because I've been known to snap up an onion now and then, hopefully not getting it. Let's see. Let me back up here. The Gila Native Plant Society has many avid hikers. Could these folks be shown where the remaining populations are and monitor them over time? What can the Gila Native Plant Society of New Mexico and GNPS do to help?
I think it seems like one of the problems is that the Forest Service doesn't seem to be all that aware of where their rare plants are located, and or I don't know that they consider them when they have a fire going. I think it would be good to, it's just such difficult work in those burned forests, but there are some populations that have not been documented again in the Turkey Feather Creek area. That trail might be open now. And so it would be really interesting to know if they're still there. There was 2 locations there, if there's any backpackers out there, and if that trail has been restored. There's some sites that I think are just going to be lost forever because they're so difficult to reach. But I think maybe one helpful thing would be, if you're hiking around out there in July, to really keep an eye out, carry your phone and your GPS, take a picture, and send it to me. It would be, so that, I think maybe that would be the most helpful if we could find populations that are unburned, and also lobby the Forest Service so they're aware of where their remaining populations are, and maybe consider some, there's some habitat restoration that you can do in the, take the blowdown off maybe, keep the cows off, like in Freeborn Canyon, which is the last remaining intact population, has a lot of livestock in it.
Not a good thing.
And also any kind of seed collection would be, I think is pretty essential, because those things are disappearing, and as long as we have a seed source, it could be something that we might consider introducing in intact habitat at higher elevations.
Is there any way of vegetatively propagating these? So some of these onions, you can divide the base, especially if there's a rhizome. You may not even have to wait for a seed set. Is it possible to do that with this one? Probably not, huh? Or else it would have been done, I assume.
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Not many people work with rare plants, but I know that the Flagstaff Arboretum has done some growing out of those plants. They might have a better idea of those things.
Don, let me turn this back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. Great questions. And I've got a lot of things going through my mind where our active GNPS members who are not afraid to go off into wild and uncharted territories looking for things, and with the right folks helping them, directing them, maybe Russ, I think maybe we could do some good.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes some awareness of a certain plant that so you can see it and recognize it for what it is and document it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's 8 o'clock. I'd like to thank you, Daniela. That was fantastic. I thought we had a great group of questions, and I think there would be lots more if we let it go much longer. I'm hoping that this can lead to something more, to lead to improved efforts to help Gooding's onion. And I guess I'm really excited, and like as I said earlier, that we have some just a wonderful cadre of botanists in our midst here in the Gila, but to have the state botanist of New Mexico come in and help us understand a wonderful part of our natural history, that's really something special. So I thank you on behalf of the Gila Native Plant Society.
Oh, you're welcome. That was fun. Glad I could share this with us, even though it's not a pretty story.
Yeah,
but
you'll probably be hearing more from us. So.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm going to end this now, and good night, everybody, and congratulations to our new board members, and thank you to our past or our board members who have gotten off the board recently, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Daniela.
Thanks. Take care.